Hartford Baptist Church, and welcome to we're episode 9 now, of our study on Galatians. Previous episode we talked about, we started Galatians chapter 3, and we went from verse 1 to verse 9, and we have been interpreting, and I think Paul's pretty clear that he's teaching that salvation is by faith alone, justification is faith alone. Paul's making an argument against works. But I also asked you to read in the previous episode. I asked you to read on your own James chapter 2, starting at verse 14 through 24. Because James seems to be teaching that it's faith plus works equals justification or salvation, and that's certainly what the Catholic Church teaches. So who's wrong here? Is James wrong or is Paul wrong? Are we as Protestants wrong or are the Catholics wrong? It seems we have two viewpoints here in Scripture and in church. And I say it seems like, we don't really, but there's an appearance of. So who's right here? We're going to look at, even though we are in a Galatians study, we're going to look at the book of James today. I'm not going to read it to you because I asked you to do that on the previous episode on your own. But go on to James chapter 2, starting in verse 14. I'm actually going to switch to the King James Bible here. I'm not going to read all this to you, but I'm going to do a few verses. But the reason I'm starting the King James, those who are going to argue that it's faith plus works for salvation are probably going to use something like the King James on you here. They're not going to come with the ESV or the NET. They're going to quote the King James to you. It's a respected translation, but it does have what I'm going to call an error here in verse 14. Verse 14 reads, "What doth it profit, my brethren, though a man say he have faith and not have works? Can faith save him?" And then go down here in verse 17, even so faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being alone. And of course, if you read through this whole passage, it's really easy to see that, faith without works is dead, true statement. But, James seems to be teaching that you need works to be saved, especially in light of verse 14. It's can faith save him? And then let's skip down here to verse 24. "Ye see then how that by works a man is justified." So by works a man's justified, and not by faith alone, says the King James here in James. So this seems to be teaching clearly that we're not saved by faith. We're saved by works, or at least faith plus works. That is the opposite of how we're reading Paul in the book of Galatians, and also how you read him in Romans. So what is going on here? We're going to go back to verse 14. And I'm going to go to the middle column, which is the NET, and I'm going to read this one here. "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but does not have works? Can this kind of faith save him?" So the NET does something different here. It says, "Can this kind of faith save him?" The King James says just, "Can faith save him?" There's a difference here. The King James seems to be just speaking of faith. Can faith save him? Just faith in general. The NET seems to be talking about a certain kind of faith. Can that certain kind of faith save him? Going back to the ESV here, which I switched to King James to it says, "Can that faith save him?" So even the ESV looks like they're talking about some specific type of faith. And I'm going to the far right-hand column. We're going to look at the Greek a little bit here. We've got the Greek article here, hey pistis. The Greek article can work like the English the, but that's not its primary function. Whenever it's used, it is telling us something about the identity of what follows it. In this case, faith. It's trying to tell us something about the identity. And I think the NET and the ESV have done well. And the King James has ignored that Greek article, hey, and has kind of led us astray. It's not talking about faith. It's talking about a specific kind of faith, and we're going to discuss what that type of faith. NET does good, where it says, "Can this kind of faith save him?" Because James is talking about a particular type of faith, and what type is it? He's contrasting different types of faith here, and here is one. Go down to verse 19. "You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. So here we have where he's saying, you believe in God. Well, good for you. Even the demons believe that. And in the Greek here, I'm going back to the far right hand column, we got pisteusen here. This is the cognate verb of that same pistis word that we seen at the top. Where earlier it said, where we read it to believe, believe or faith. This one here is basically the verb form. It is to believe in, to have faith in. You could literally translate this as, even the demons have faith in God being one. What is the difference here? A demon's faith versus a true believer's faith. The demon believes God's real, without a doubt. And even many humans, many people in the church believe God's real. But what James overall is saying here, just believing God is real is not saving faith. That's not that kind of faith that saves. True faith comes with obedience. In Romans, when Paul speaks of believing that Jesus is your Savior, but he also mentions believing Jesus is your Lord. You have to do both. You just can't believe Jesus is real. You must live your life in obedience to him and accept him as your Lord. And this is really the same thing that James is saying here in chapter 2. That if you have a type of faith, if you have a type of belief that's like the demons, it produces no good works. That faith, that kind of faith, is not the faith that saves. That kind of belief is not the belief that saves. Islam believes in the God of Abraham, but they don't acknowledge Jesus and they don't serve Jesus. So while they have a belief in God, that is not a saving faith in God. And likewise, this is what James is arguing against as well. And certainly Paul would not disagree with him, and Paul will say similar things throughout his writing. Genuine faith produces works. And when Martin Luther, which initially he didn't like this chapter of James, we didn't like the entire book of James, called it the Epistle of Straw. Once he realized what James was talking about, he made the comment of, we're saved by faith alone, but not by a faith that is alone. So much like the parable of the soils that Jesus talks about in the Gospel of Matthew and Mark, true believers produce fruit. It's not the fruit that saves you. It's not the works that save you. The works prove your faith to be genuine. And that's what we're going to go down here towards the end of this passage, the last two verses here. And, let me see where I want to start at. Let's start in, let's go verse 23 here. And scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed in God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by his works and not by faith alone. And in the same way was not the prostitute, or Rahab the prostitute, justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way. For as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so faith apart from works is dead. So here, this Abraham story that James is speaking of, this is the same example Paul's talking about. And Paul says Abraham was justified by his faith. James, while at first glance James may seem to be saying something different, he's really saying that Abraham's righteousness was proven to be true by his actions. Rahab, the prostitute that we see in the day of Joshua, her faith was proven to be genuine by her works. The works justify the faith. It proves it to be true. So if we're living a life where we say we have faith and we act like we have faith and by the words that come out of our mouth, but we don't produce fruit, there's nothing good coming out of us for God or for love of others, if nothing has changed in our life, then we need to really ask ourselves, is our faith genuine? Is our faith real? And in the words of James would say, faith apart from works is dead. This is not the kind of faith that saves us. Genuine faith accepts Jesus as Lord. It just doesn't acknowledge God being in existence. Genuine faith accepts Jesus as Lord, and we live our life through him. So wrapping this up, no contradicting between James and Paul. They used their terminology a little different ways, but realistically they believe the same exact thing. James is just emphasizing that genuine faith is proven by works. Now, James isn't making the argument that you are saved by works, though the King James may make it seem that way, and an initial reading may make it seem that way. But when you take the whole thing in context, James is comparing two types of faith. He's comparing the faith of a genuine believer who has good fruit in his life or her life, and he's comparing it to that faith of the demon. The faith of the demon is limited to just believing God is real. They do not serve God, and that's the difference that James is talking about. All right, and we'll wrap it up there, and I will see you next time for episode 10, and we will be back in actually in Galatians. See you then.